Welcome to the second video of 2-3. Today we're going to finish talking about operations with fractions. Just a reminder of the learning objectives for 2-3. Make sure you have these down somewhere. Today we're going to start by talking about multiplying fractions and mixed numbers. So we know how to add and subtract, but when you have a fraction and you want to figure out a part of that fraction, you need to multiply. So remember that a fraction is part of a whole. Sometimes it's tricky to figure out when to multiply fractions when you are faced with a real world problem. First, let's learn how to actually multiply them, and then we can look at applying them. So if we're going to multiply a fraction and a whole number together, you just have to make a whole number into a fraction. Then you can multiply across just as you would with two fractions, and then finally simplify if possible. What happens if we're multiplying mixed numbers? Well, because mixed numbers have wholes and parts, multiplying mixed numbers requires an extra step. So basically we're going to turn them into improper fractions first, and then we can multiply just like normal fractions. And then if we have an improper fraction as the product, we can convert it back to a mixed number as the final answer. So we have 3.5 times 2 1/3. And the first thing we need to do is take each one and turn it into an improper fraction. 3.5, that turns into 7/2. 2 1/3, that turns into 7/3. Now when we multiply straight across. 7 times 7 is 49. 2 times 3 is 6. And then since they started off as mixed numbers, we can turn this into a mixed number. 6 goes into 49 8 times with 1 left over. So 8 1/6. Now we have 2/9 times 18/30. Okay, one thing you can do is you can simplify before you multiply. If you notice, 9 on the bottom and 18 on the top. Okay, when you have a number on the top and a number on the bottom that we can divide and take a common factor out of, we can do that. 9 and 18, I can pull a 9 out of there. Okay, and that turns into a 1, and this turns into a 2. Okay, so really, now I've got 2 over 1 times 2 over 30. Okay, and I can do the same thing with the 30 on the bottom and one of the 2's on the top. I can take a 2 out of both of those. So that's going to turn into a 1. That's going to turn into a 15. So now I'm going to have 2 over 1 times 1 over 15. This makes my multiplication a lot easier. So now I can multiply straight across and get 2 times 1 is 2. 1 times 15 is 15. And my final answer is 2/15. A few more examples here. First one, we've got a couple of mixed numbers. Again, turning them into improper fractions, I would get 11/5 times 7/2. And then I can multiply that straight across. So 11 times 7 is 77. 5 times 2 is 10. So I've got 77 over 10. I can't simplify that fraction down at all, but what I can do is turn it into the mixed number 7 7/10. The next one, you'll notice again that we can simplify. We've got a 9 on the bottom and an 18 on the top. That'll be a 2 and a 1 because I can pull a 9 out of both. Also notice the 4 and the 20. I can take a 4 out of both of those and I'm left with 1 and 5. So really I'm multiplying 2/5 and 1 over 1. Multiply straight across. 2 times 1 is 2. 5 times 1 is 5. My final answer is 2/5. And this last one here, they're already in fractions. If you look, I can't simplify anything because again, they have to be on the bottom and the top, so I can't take anything out of the 3 and the 6 because they're both on the bottom. So I need to multiply straight across. 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 6 is 18. I get 5 over 18, and that's a simplified fraction. So here's an example of multiplying fractions in a real-world example. So Deirdre claims that it only takes her 6 3/4 hours to complete her homework every night. Carlos thinks he can finish his homework in 2/3 of that time. How long does Carlos think it can take him to complete his homework? Okay, so when we have 6 3/4 times 2/3, okay, because he thinks he can do it in 2/3 of the amount of that. Okay, so since we're multiplying with a mixed number, we have to turn that into an improper fraction. 6 3/4 turns into 27/4. And I'm multiplying that by 2/3. And looking again, if you'll notice, 27 and 3, I can take a 3 out of both of those. So a 1 and a 9. 2 and 4, I can take a 2 out of both of those, leaving 1 and 2. And so what I'm multiplying together is 9/2 and 1/1. So when I multiply that straight across, well, 9 times 1 is 9, 2 times 1 is 2. I get 9/2. Since I had a mixed number in my problem, I can write this as a mixed number as well. 2 goes into 9 4 times with 1 left over, so 9/2 is the same as 4.5. Okay, so now we know how to add, subtract, and multiply fractions. So it will also be very helpful to divide them as well. And there will be some real-world situations where we can use that. So dividing fractions is a lot like multiplying. Okay, in fact, that's how we're going to do it, is we're actually going to turn it into a multiplication. Now remember, when you divide two numbers, one number is called the dividend and the other is the divisor. So in the division problem, A divided by B, A is called the dividend or the top number, and B is the divisor or the bottom number. So when we're dividing fractions, we can simply multiply the top number by the inverted divisor or the reciprocal. So how do we invert that? We would just flip the fraction. So a half would become 2/1, 3/4 becomes 4/3. Okay? So basically we just take that second fraction and we flip it and turn it into a multiplication problem. Okay, so if we're going to do 6/8 divided by 1/2, I can rewrite that as 6/8 times and then flip that second fraction to be 2/1. Okay, so now it's a multiplication problem, and if you notice, I got a 2 and an 8. I can take a 2 out of both of those. Okay, and then I also, you look at this, I've got a 6 and a 4. I can take another 2 out of those, leaving me with 3/2 times 1/1, multiplying straight across. 3 times 1 is 3, 2 times 1 is 2. My final answer is 3/2. And if I want to, I can write that as an improper fraction, 1.5. Dividing mixed numbers, we follow the same rules as multiplying mixed numbers. We have to turn them into improper fractions first. So 6 1/4 turns into 25/4, and 1.5 turns into 3/2. So now instead of taking 25/4 divided by 3/2, I'm going to take 25/4 and I'm going to multiply it by 2/3. And I'm going to look for anything that simplifies down. Okay. One thing is 2 and 4. I can take a 2 out of both of those. And 25, the only thing I can take out of 25 is a 5, and I don't see any of those. So I'm going to multiply 25/2 and 1/3. Multiplying straight across, 25 times 1 is 25. 2 times 3 is 6. So my improper fraction is 25/6. 6 goes into 25 4 times with 1 left over, so it would be 4 1/6. What I want you to do now is pause the video and get these last two problems done, and then hit play and see how you did. Okay, so on the first one, we should have changed it to being 6/8 times 4/1. You notice that 4 and 8, we can take a 4 out of both, leaving 1 and 2. And then with that 2 that we just got, we can simplify it with the 6 on top, so giving 3/1. So really I'm taking 3/1 times 1/1, which turns into 3/1, which 3 divided by 1 is 3. Our final answer is 3. For the last one, we should have rewritten it as 5/10 times 2/1. 2 and 10, I can take a 2 out of both, leaving 1 and 5. And then I've got a 5 on the top and the bottom, so I can take a 5 out of both of those, leaving 1/1. So my fractions turn into 1/1 times 1/1. Multiplying those together, I get 1/1, which is just 1. So now we're going to do real-world problems using simple equations involving products and quotients of fractions and mixed numbers. So fractions are all around us, and the nice thing about fractions is they're more precise than decimals. It's easier to write a third than 0.333 repeating forever and ever and ever. Also, fractions are easy to visualize. We can easily see what a third looks like. We take 1 whole cup and we divide it into 3 parts. You will use your knowledge of fractions just as often as you use addition, subtraction, and multiplication in everyday life. Let's take a look at some examples. Okay, so we got Yoria is building a sailboat. She needs 8 planks that are 3/4 foot in length. She has a single piece of wood that's 6.5 feet long. How many planks can she cut from this board, and does she have enough to make her sailboat? So we have one piece that's 6.5 feet long, and we want it in 3/4 length pieces. So we're going to divide 6.5 by 3/4. So the first thing we do, take this mixed number and turn it into an improper fraction. That would be 13 halves. And then instead of dividing, we're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the second one. Okay. Simplifying if we can, we've got a 4 and a 2. We can take a 2 out of both, leaving 2 and 1. So we've got 13 over 1 times 2 over 3. And there's nothing else I can take out of there, so I multiply straight across. 13 times 2 is 26. 1 times 3 is 3. Then I turn this back into an improper or a mixed number. 3 goes into 26 8 times with 2 left over. So she would get 8 full pieces and have 2/3 left over. So then, yes, she does have enough because she only needs the 8. Here is the real life example completed that was at the beginning of the lesson. Make sure you read all the way through this before going on. Here's a review of our important terms. We've got a fraction that's a part of a whole, reciprocal or multiplicative inverse. Okay, we flip the fraction. Mixed number is a number consisting of an integer and a regular fraction. Greatest common factor is the highest number that divides into exactly 2 or more numbers. Lowest common denominator of 2 or more fractions is a least common multiple of their denominators or their bottom numbers. Equivalent fractions are fractions that describe the same part of a whole. And improper fractions is a fraction where the numerator is bigger than the denominator, or the top is bigger than the bottom.